Okay, let's talk about yield. You only have two ways to increase yield. You can increase the effect of what you're using or lower the cost. That's it. So let's talk about what works in our field. First, we got to do what works if we're going to increase yield. These data come from Cavalli and Fornes, 1999, classic meta-analysis. And basically, I like to point out to folks, these are the median effect sizes for strategies that we all have in our back pocket. We don't need to conduct an extensive battery of assessment to use them. They include things like high doses of corrective feedback, high quality corrective feedback, matching student proficiency to instructional strategy. Those are the things we all know how to do. Using formative assessment, very, very powerful, right? Now, on the other side, we have what they call specialized instruction in their meta-analysis. And it includes things like determining an aptitude by treatment interaction, finding a treatment that is aligned with some sort of measured aptitude on the part of the child, like visual input for visual learners, that sort of stuff. But it includes basically any kind of strategy that requires an extensive cognitive battery of assessment. And you can just see the difference in the effect sizes. So there's no effect really for highly specialized intervention. On the left, these come from Hattie. These are the things that we know produce very, very strong effect sizes. And on the right are the things that the school boards like to talk about. So on the right, we have things like spending more money. We have things like reducing class size, which means spending more money. We have things like multi-age and multi-grade classes. These are things that we sort of know the effect, and to spend a whole lot of time talking about whether we should do it is not going to be high yield because they don't work. So if we take those Hattie effect sizes and fit those effects onto a trend of student performance, this happens to be a trend of second grade students on the SAT-10. These are their NCE scores. We can fit Hattie's effect sizes, and then I want to say to teachers, what you do really makes a difference. So choose it carefully. And if you want to grow performance, let's do these things. They're all right here. Those are the things that work for kids. Okay, so do you all know Kent Johnson? You ever heard of him from Morningside Academy? That is a picture of Kent, and he is one of my heroes. And he will tell you teaching is not telling. I believe it was Fred Keller who first said that the learner is never wrong. So effective instruction is instruction that has an effect on student learning, which means you got to measure. That's how you know. Teaching is not telling, and it's certainly not just adopting some strategy and giving it to a child whether they need it or not. If it doesn't work, you didn't teach. So we want to help teachers identify those things that really work. That's the first step, and that's easy. That we have really good meta-analytic data to guide us. All right, the other thing we want to do, though, is consider the costs. Boy, people love a shiny, new, packaged treatment. However, there's costs associated with all the different treatments, right? Costs in education include things like teacher buy-in and goodwill, tangible costs of the materials, instructional minutes, right? These are data showing from aggregated randomized controlled trial data showing the effects of pharmacological treatment, a statin drug, for preventing a repeat heart attack for people who have had a heart attack, okay? And this is the placebo group, an aggregate placebo. So it looks like a nice effect. You might look at that and go, yep, you ought to take that medication, but look at what Mediterranean diet is. The source is there if you want to look it up. It's kind of fun, the nnt.org. Mediterranean diet is lower cost. Doesn't have any side effects, really, except, whoop, you might lose some weight, which would be great, right? It's probably easier to take a pill than it is to follow a Mediterranean diet. A little bit more response cost associated with following a Mediterranean diet, but it's cheaper, it's lower cost. So what we want to ask in education is what are our options that have been shown to work in other settings? That's the first thing, and we've got great data to guide us. But what about what's already available in the school where we are working? Not just the things we like, not just the things that I prefer to go to in my toolkit, but what are teachers already using? And can we tweak that? Can we adjust that to make it more effective? What are the things that are low cost, easily accessible, less complex? less complex, less costly, and already embraced by teachers. These are other ways we can magnify the yield of what we do. There are some great little takeaway points here. Age of the child is a yield magnifier. The younger the child, the greater the effective intervention. These data come from Reading First, and the red group are the kids who are at risk, and this is what happens if you just wait as they age up through 4th grade. And yet, if you take that group of red kids and give half just a good research-based core, and then you come in and give intensive instructional intervention to the other half, you get that effect. So the age of the child is a yield magnifier. Why? Because you prevent future deficits. If you fix it earlier, you prevent future deficits. Here's another one. The greater the risk when you start, the stronger the reward. So I always say to school psychologists, if you're working in a school that's very, very low achieving, great news. A low baseline is great. You'll get a stronger effect for anything that you do. And these are some data showing you what that looks like. Those are calculated from some RCT work that we've done in mathematics. So you get a much stronger effect. Here's another one, managing the intervention. We still continue to overemphasize selecting the intervention, and we underemphasize what it takes to actually get it implemented. The first step is that we should be looking at the host environment. Joe Kovaleski and I wrote about this in a book, in Ed Shapiro, and we spelled out, these are sort of the basic characteristics that need to be in place if any intervention you bring to the table can work. You can't just put it in a crummy environment and think it's going to make a difference for the child. These are the characteristics of an adequate host environment for intervention. Here's another one. Using class-wide intervention when there is a class-wide problem. Class-wide intervention can be very, very powerful. And this is an example of an entire grade. Every bar is a class, and the orange portion is the percentage of kids who are at risk. So if you screen and you get this picture, it's going to be much higher yield for you to try to run class-wide interventions than to try to work with these kids one kid at a time. You'll never get any traction with that because there are too many. And then tracking who is responding and who's not. So these are, every bar is a class given class-wide intervention, and the bar value is the number of weeks, the number of skills that have been mastered per class given the same type of intervention for the same period of time. So as a coach, what you want to do is track this every week. As a school psychologist, when you're on site, you're pulling this up and looking, and where you want to go spend your time is classes 9, 10, and 11, right? Because they're not making growth like the others. When you go back and do your screening data, at your next screening occasion, you're going to pull out the growth data. Any software will do this for you. All of the tools that we use to screen will give you this. And you want to make sure that if you invested in a class-wide or a grade-wide intervention that every kid grew. This is 4th grade at my kid's school. And everybody grew. Everybody grows. She's a wonderful teacher. But that's the goal. And if you don't see that, you want to go in and do something differently because guess what? The intervention's not being implemented if kids are not growing, most likely. When managed, it really, really works. And I'll tell you about one little metric that is really neat, and I hope we see it more in education. But it's a metric called number needed to treat. And number needed to treat, you can only calculate it when you have conducted a randomized control trial. And it is a risk reduction metric that tells you this. If I give this intervention to X number of kids, I will prevent one bad outcome, on average. And so the number needed to treat for class-wide math intervention is 7. In a class of 28 kids, if you give class-wide intervention, in this risk context of these data at least, you will save 4 kids from failing the high-stakes test of math. That is a high-yield intervention. But it really is not sexy, right? It's the old stuff. We all know. You have to do the work and the management of it to make sure that the investment pays off.